material to cover about Zen philosophy, but there's no Zen without meditation. If you've already practiced meditation in the past, and while you are meditating, I'll give you some instruction about Zen meditation, how it might be different from the kind of meditation that you might be used to. So in Zen meditation, they often say that the most important thing is your posture. And in fact, in Zen we say that most people think you're meditating with your mind, but it's really your body that you're meditating with. The posture is very, very important in Zen. So you want to try to sit in an erect way, but relaxed at the same time. You want your head up as if the top of your head is reaching for the sky. But at the same time, you should feel relaxed, don't feel tense. And relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, relax your eyelids. And your head should not be either upward like this or down like this. It should be just pretty much even, because if your head is up like this, chances are you'll be thinking too much. And if your head is like this, you'll probably start to get sleepy. So try to keep your head even. And I want to say a few things about meditation that are very important to Zen. In Zen, I know 2 weeks ago, Reggie said that his teacher said try not to think at all while you're sitting. That's very unusual. I've never heard that from any other Zen teacher in 40 years. There's usually 2 styles of meditation in terms of what to do with your mind. Rinzai, they'll give you a koan or a question or something to think about while you're meditating, and you'll be asked to give an answer or give your view afterwards. But in Sota Zen, they just say just let your mind go normally and watch your thoughts. Don't try to stop thinking. That's not really Zen meditation. Don't stop thinking. Just let your thoughts move along. The metaphor we always use is it's like the clouds going across a clear blue sky. So you don't try to grab onto your thoughts, but you see them, and at the same time, that helps you to understand yourself better over time. You feel you're having angry thoughts, you're angry about something. Well, what is it that makes you angry? How do you deal with anger? What can you do with your anger that might not be damaging to yourself or anyone else? Control, do something about, or are you worried cross-legged, get up and sit in a chair. It's perfectly okay. And for those of you who feel comfortable sitting and cross-legged, if it's just a little discomfort, you're okay with it. I know sitting in that position can feel really wonderful. So if it feels good for you, that's fine. But if you have a lot of pain, then you should think about whether you should sit in a chair. And if you get up and you still have pain, or you're having pain when you're walking, you should never sit cross-legged again. Meditation should not be torture. Meditation should be the most relaxing thing you do during the day. And one last thing is, you'll find that if you can meditate with a group like this, or in a temple, or any kind of gathering, that's something we recommend over sitting alone in your room by yourself, which is fine to do that, but if you can join a meditation group like this or go to a temple, then you get the energy from all of the other people. We have a saying in Zen, you don't reach enlightenment by yourself. We enlighten each other, we help each other to reach enlightenment. So if you can be part of a group like this, and meditate with other people, even if it's one or two friends, try to do that. So we'll let you meditate silently for a few minutes before we start our talk. That's better. This is my first time up here. Now, laughter is part of Zen, which I'll talk about later. Normally, when we do Zen meditation, we would do it for about half an hour, but we've got so much to try to discuss today. I've given myself the impossible task of having to try to introduce Zen philosophy in an hour and 15 minutes. But Daru is giving you a handout with some of the main ideas about Zen, and also on the back of the page, a list of books and websites for those of you who want to learn more about Zen. And also, let me ask, how many of you have studied Zen before? Oh, a few people. That's good. How many of you are more familiar with Theravada, Thai Buddhism? Probably a lot of people, and it looks like some of you are fairly new to Buddhism, and that's fine. One thing that I think will be instructive is also talking about how Zen is different from Theravada Buddhism, how it's different from Thai Buddhism. But one thing that's important is that there's no one, dogma for Zen that everyone follows. Zen can have lots of different opinions. There's different schools of Zen. So if any of you have any ideas that you want to share or questions that you want to ask, please raise your hand at any time, and we'll give you the microphone. I'd like to ask you to please put away your mobile phones, because you don't realize it, but when you're looking at your mobile phone, you're not just distracting yourself, you're also distracting the people around you when they see the light flashing in their eyes. So try, I know it's tough, but for an hour and 15 minutes, see if you can live without your mobile phone. I know it sounds impossible for some of you. Okay, so if anyone has any different views to bring up or anything they want to discuss, please do it at any time. And it's really true that different Zen priests will give you different answers to the same question. We had a Zen club a few years ago. Some of you were here back then. And 1 month we said we're going to talk about what is your true self. That's something that comes up in Zen a lot. What is your true self? And I was spending some time in New York and San Francisco before that meeting, and I thought, well, I know some of the Zen priests in both of these cities. I'll ask a few of them how they would answer that question. So I asked 6 different Zen priests in New York and San Francisco, what is the true self? What does that mean? And I got 6 different answers. It could have been 12, right? So don't be afraid to disagree with something that I say, or say, that's not Zen, or that's not what I heard about Zen, or that's not what Roshi so-and-so said to me in Amsterdam. So, this is part of Zen philosophy, to have different answers to the same questions. But I want to start out by talking about the basic of Zen philosophy. The basic of all Buddhist sects is the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the precepts. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about what all of those things mean, and there's different translations, different interpretations. But when we talk about the 4 Noble Truths, the first thing the Buddha said was dukkha, right? Dukkha, right? What does that mean? Anybody? What did that mean when the Buddha said dukkha? Suffering, everyone agree with that? Sorry? Unsatisfactoriness, yeah, that's closer to what dukkha means. The first translations of Buddhist Four Noble Truths into English was done by Westerners who apparently wanted to make Buddhism sound compatible with Christianity. So they said, the Buddha said, life is suffering. It's not what the Buddha said. The Buddha never said life is suffering. He didn't say life is dukkha. He just said dukkha. Like maybe he meant the subject of my talk tonight is dukkha. And what Ren said is closer to the actual meaning. Life feels unsatisfactory or in some ways not fully satisfying. Why? Does anyone know about what they call the three seals of existence, the three problems that cause feelings of unhappiness or dissatisfaction? Anyone?
Grasping, attachment.
Well, that's what causes, that's the causes of dukkha, right? Grasping, clinging, attachment, yeah.
Talking about not self and
Yeah.
impermanence.
Yeah. Yeah, dukkha is the unsatisfactoriness, or could include pain, suffering, sadness. And there's also impermanence. Nothing is permanent. We like some things in our lives to be permanent, but nothing is permanent. And no self, is that also a correct translation? I don't have a self? Yeah?
I've been told that no self is not the correct translation, but rather that not self is the correct, closer to what it actually is. Because the Buddha nature, I guess.
Yeah, anybody else on that? We usually translate it as no permanent self. It doesn't mean you don't have a self. Yeah, you've got you have your identity, but is anybody here the same person that you were 10 years ago or 20 years ago? And are you going to exist forever as the person you are now? No, you were always changing, so you don't have a permanent self. Doesn't mean that you don't have a self. That confuses a lot of people, but it's easier to understand that our identities are always changing and they're not permanent. And also we're impermanent too. We're all going to die someday. So that's how we interpret the three seals. And what David said about grasping and clinging and attachment, that's what causes suffering. That was the second noble truth, the causes of suffering. And sometimes earlier translation says the cause of dukkha is your desires. Well, does that sound right to everyone, that desires cause suffering? Your desires are bad? Well, if I want love, I want happiness, or I want comfort, or I want to eat, mango and sticky rice, is that a problem? Is that bad for me to want those things?
It's only suffering when you don't get it. You can't control those things. They're outside of you, so.
Yeah, what we would say is desires are natural. It's normal to have desires. Fall in love, or eat good food, or travel to Paris. What is it that you would like to do? But you're not always going to get everything you want. So the problem, like David said, is if you're attached to your desires. Clinging might be a good interpretation, grasping. And at San Francisco Zen Center, a couple of the older Zen priests did some research into the etymology of the language, the words that the Buddha used, going back to Sanskrit. And does anybody know what the word dukkha comes from? Tuk? Hmm?
Could be tanha. Tanha or
I can't hear you.
tanha. Can you hear me?
He's asking what
The word dukkha is, I mean, there are a lot of etymology exactly, but the actual word used, I think, was tanha or trishna in the literature.
Yeah, well, the
T-A-N-H-A is generally written in the books in English.
well, the root of the word dukkha, as you know, Ajahn Pandit also gave this translation, comes from a word that meant a wheel with uneven spokes, so the wheel isn't perfectly round. So one Zen priest said the best translation for dukkha would be, life is a bumpy road. So it's not all, it's not all suffering. We know that life can be very enjoyable and we should enjoy our lives. What we have to work with is the things that cause suffering, the attachments, clinging, grasping. Oh, I'm in love with Susan, but she's not in love with me. Oh, how can I go on without Susan? Whether it's love or whether it's, oh, I've got to get this job. If I don't get this job, I'm a failure. Well, I'll get another job. And so it's the attachments, the grasping, the clinging that causes suffering. And so the third noble truth was, if you can let go of your attachments, grasping, clinging to your desires, then you can not have so much dukkha in your life. And then the next step is the Eightfold Path, which I'm not going to go through all 8. Any questions or any other ideas people want to toss out yet? Yeah.
So, I know that
Yeah, please use the microphone.
in the Buddhist teaching, there's a difference between tanha, which is craving, and is it chanda? Chanda, which is aspiration, which is a kind of desire that's not negative, it's not harmful. Have you ever heard that?
No.
Anybody? If I elaborate this? So,
That's the desire for enlightenment. So that's kind of a noble thing. It's not like I want to go to Paris, I'm craving my mango with sticky rice. No, I want to go to enlightenment. I want to walk the Buddhist path, and that's the kind of desire, that's the chanda, which is not apprehensible.
Yeah.
Might there be a difference between desire, aspiration, and expectation? Aspiration is something that you don't hold on to, but expectation is something you almost demand from other people or yourself? Perhaps.
Okay.
I think Tom has a good point there, because you say, well, desire as such, I desire to go to Paris, what's wrong with that? But the desire is often, I want to go to Paris, and then Paris will look exactly like it was described by the tourist brochures. That's a wonderful city, and the lights are on, and you eat these wonderful fresh croissants every morning. And you go to Paris, and actually, yeah, some of it may be there, but also it's raining today, and the croissants are not really all that fresh, and my desire was, I want this perfect city, and hey, you know what, it's not really all that perfect. And then all of a sudden, you're suffering, because the world is not like you were imagining it was. So in that sense, I think desire, we can debate it at nauseam, but it's something that still is a good indication. If I desire something to be like that, and it isn't like that, disappointment.
I would propose expectations. I would propose expectations as an expression. So having expectations, and whether they're reasonable or unreasonable, which probably kind of poses the problem here. What is reasonable and what is unreasonable?
Yeah, you know what that's like when you get into a relationship with somebody. Oh, this person is just perfect for me. And then when you're actually living with the other person, oh, well, this isn't as easy as I hoped it would be.
And if that person is wonderful, and the relation is wonderful, due to the law of impermanence, you will change, the other person will change, the relationship will change, and all of a sudden, poof.
And same thing with getting the job that you want. Oh, I got the job that I want. Oh, God, some of these people I'm working with are horrible. So that's it. Nothing is going to be perfect. But at the same time, I think of Buddhism as the way to happiness. A lot of people think Buddhism is all about suffering. I think the Dalai Lama, doesn't he have a book called something like The Road to Happiness? Something like that?
Art of happiness.
The Art of Happiness. Yeah, that's the idea, that if you're going through the Four Noble Truths and going through the Eightfold Path, that will lead you to where you don't feel dukkha, you don't feel that suffering or unsatisfactoriness all the time. Yeah.
Sorry. I wonder whether happiness is a. Well, let's put it this way. For me, happiness is an expectation, and something that is questionable whether you can permanently achieve it. In my point of view, contentment is something different. I think being content with yourself, with your life, with your understanding, is something that I think is achievable because it is something that is within me, how I assess things. Happiness, however, is a feeling at the end. And I think, I don't know, for me there's a very different, does Zen differentiate or Buddhism differentiate between these two kind of states, you wish?
That's a good question, isn't it? I think that goes back to what Ren said about translating dukkha as unsatisfactory. So maybe you reach a point where you're just satisfied with life, like you said, contented. You don't have to always be happy. No one is always happy unless they're, in some kind of either fantasy or doing really good drugs. Yeah, and so you're not always going to be happy. You're still going to have to deal with, impermanence and, pain, physical pain. What the Buddha saw when he left the palace and he saw sickness, old age, and death. Those things are always going to be part of our lives. But, maybe another word to use is acceptance. You accept those things as part of life, and you can try to live your life as contentedly as possible. Oh, some really good ideas here. Anybody else? I want to talk a little about the precepts, and I'm not sure if everybody here is familiar with the precepts, but the precepts are, first precept is no killing, and there's no stealing, don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. The third has been translated variously as no lying or no harmful speech, and that would include gossip, insults, things like that. And Zen would go along with those three translations. The fourth precept of no intoxicants is kind of changing in modern times, because that precept might apply more to monks and nuns and priests who live in a monastery, but we're all lay people, and so we wouldn't say no intoxicants. It doesn't mean you can never have a glass of wine. We would say no abuse, no misuse of intoxicants. Don't get drunk, don't become a drug user, an alcoholic, or a pothead. But if you want to have a beer or have a glass of wine, that's okay. In fact, sometimes in San Francisco Zen Center, after the Dharma talk, it's okay, let's go have a beer. But nobody gets drunk. And the next precept about sexuality, we wouldn't say no sex. That would apply to monks, nuns, and priests in a monastery, because you could see how that could cause trouble if you're in a monastery. But we would interpret it as no misuse of sexuality. Sex is okay. Not everybody realizes that. If you're from a Western culture, you might have that idea. Most of us were taught sex is sinful, or it's dirty, or it's immoral. And in Buddhism, it's not any of those things. And so we would say, don't misuse sexuality, or no harmful use of sexuality. Don't lie to your partners. Don't do anything that would hurt them. It's okay if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, even if, or you're married. And in modern Zen monasteries in most parts of the world, Zen priests and monks and nuns can have boyfriends, girlfriends, get married, have children. That's pretty much normal now. But you wouldn't, do anything harmful, either physically or emotionally, to any of your partners. Any thoughts about that, or any questions about that? You can see how Zen is constantly evolving, especially as it's spreading into the West. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you haven't actually already mentioned it, the difference in the view of the use of intoxicants between Theravada and Zen. I remember, like yourself, I went to a Zen group many years ago, and at the end of it, sometimes we would go to the pub, and no one ever became intoxicated, but we did drink alcohol, and yet I then went to the Vipassana centres run by S.N. Goenka, and he's very, very strict, absolutely no alcohol at all. So what is the definitive answer? Is there, or why is there a difference between Theravada and Zen? I'm just puzzled.
You'd have to ask someone who's a Theravada monk about that. Somebody like Ajahn Pandit would probably be able to answer that. But it probably would also go back to the idea of being in a monastery. When the Buddha was teaching, was teaching disciples and monks. He wasn't teaching, his teaching wasn't geared mostly for lay people like us living normal lives. But now, someone who's a Zen monk or a Zen nun or a Zen priest can have a job. You wake up, like at San Francisco Zen Center, where I did most of my studying. You wake up at 5 in the morning, you meditate and do prayers and chanting, then you do your chores, then you have breakfast, and it's only like 8 o'clock, then you can go to your job. You can work for 8 hours, come back for the evening meditation session, and any meetings or more chores that you have to do. And like I said, you can be married, you can have children, you can have a normal life at the same time that you're a Zen priest. Question? Yeah.
The five precepts that Joe mentioned, they are exactly the same in Theravada. The only thing is the order is slightly different. Don't take intoxicants as number 5. And the idea is there's the first 4 that you want to follow, and there's nothing really strange about them. You find almost the same thing in almost any religion. Don't kill, don't steal, and stuff like that. And then the idea is by taking intoxicant, it's making it more difficult for you to actually follow what was promised before. So yeah, you're not intending is there's different sets of rules for lay people and for monks. I forgot the exact number. For monks, there's something like 232 precepts, and some very strange ones. They are quite strict in keeping them. And the first 5, that's for lay people, and for lay people it's more relaxed, but for monks it's stricter. Like for monks in Theravada, no, you cannot marry, sex, absolutely no sex at all, no drinking at all, and for lay people it's like, oh, okay, start with having the good intention.
Thank you.
Who decides that these rules can evolve?
Sorry?
Who decides that these rules can evolve or how to evolve them within Zen?
Yeah. See, there can be a great variance in the behavior at different monasteries and different temples because so much is decided by whoever is the head of that temple or that monastery. That was something that, I don't know, some of you might remember, about 6 or 7 years ago we had a Zen priest from America, Ajahn Konin, and she said that so much is just decided by whoever's the abbot or the abbess of that temple at the time. That, we think of meditation as being the most central part of Zen. And she said that there are some Zen temples where they don't meditate very much. And there's others where they're meditating practically all the time. And she said in some Theravada temples they're doing a lot of meditation, sometimes more than in Zen temples. And in other ones they don't meditate as much. So a lot depends on who's running the temple or the monastery at the time. It's not like, there isn't anyone in Buddhism like the Pope who gives rules for all Catholics in the entire world. And even then, if you are familiar with Catholicism, things can vary from church to church.
It's also why it's important if you want to go to the temple to study for a longer time that you try different temples. They are all different, and you have to find the one that you feel at this moment, this approach is the best approach for me. And then maybe after some time you change, and you go to another temple with another style, because at that moment that's the right approach for you.
Yeah, I also recommend trying to visit temples or meditation groups from different branches. There's a Shambhala group that teaches Tibetan meditation on Sukhumvit Soi 23. You can Google them. And right now there's a Zen teacher from America, right, who's doing a series of Zen meditation and Dharma talks at the Shambhala Center. I think it's the first time that they've had anything besides Tibetan instruction. So that's every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock for the next few weeks. If you go to Shambhala Center website, you'll find the information. And we're hoping to have that teacher here sometime within the next month. And that's a good thing because many people, I even met Zen priests who only know Zen, Theravada monks who only know Theravada, Tibetan teachers who only know Tibetan Buddhism. And it's really a good idea, I think, to learn about all the different branches. And then, just like in choosing which branch you want to stick with or which temple you want to stick with, that way you've had that experience of seeing different teachers and different styles of teaching. I want to talk just for a few minutes about the background of Zen. A lot of people think of Zen as Japanese, but that's because it was mostly Japanese priests who brought Zen to the West. But Zen really started in China, and a lot of the Zen stories, the koans, the teaching goes back to China, what they call the Golden Age of Zen, which is Chan in Chinese, from like about 600 to 800 AD. And the legendary originator of Zen is Bodhidharma, who brought Zen from India to China, and China developed Zen for hundreds of years, and then the most important Japanese teacher who brought Zen from China to Japan was Dogen. He lived about 800 years ago, went to China, and came back to Japan with all the teachings and all the stories and koans. And it's really just been the last century that it's really been growing in the West. Ironically, Zen is pretty much dying in Japan. There's very little of it left. I visited Shunryu Suzuki's temple. Shunryu Suzuki, very famous teacher. He started San Francisco Zen Center, wrote the famous book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Some of you might have heard of that book. And I went to visit his temple, and there might be one or two people who come for meditation each day. Sometimes the priest, who's his grandson, has to meditate alone. And the other forms of Buddhism are more popular in Japan, but the ironic thing is Zen is growing in the West. There's Zen centers all over North America, South America, Europe, Israel. In fact, we're going to have an Israeli Zen teacher here for 3 weeks in April. Great teacher, Gil Alan. Some of you have seen him before. Really a great teacher. But to understand Zen, you have to understand that Zen grew in China as a combination of Buddhism and Taoism. Any of you familiar with Taoism, Lao Tzu, Chuang Tzu? Can anybody say what the most important teachings of Taoism are? Anybody want to try that? I know it's very difficult to explain. Makes Zen look easy.
Yin yang, right? Some sort of balance. That's what we're right now.
That's a big part of it. Everything in the universe is in balance. Good and bad, life and death, love and hate. Patrick?
Isn't the first line of the Tao Te Ching that the Tao, true Tao, cannot be spoken?
Yeah, and then he wrote down 80 pages about it. That the Tao is mysterious. Anybody else? Hmm? I mean, you want to use the microphone? I don't think they can hear you back there.
Flow. F-L-O-W.
Sorry? Flow. Yeah. That is like, go with the flow, meaning go with the energy flow. Be in harmony with energy flow of your life, of the life around you, of the planet and the universe. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah?
Isn't there a book called Tao, the Watercourse Way?
Oh, that was Alan Watts's book about Taoism. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, Alan Watts was a great scholar of Asian philosophy. He was British, but he wrote some of the best books about Zen and Taoism. And the Watercourse Way is like, that's the symbol of the flow of life. How many of you have read the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse? That's a really great book also to start with. That gives you a lot of Buddhist philosophy. But in Taoism, they say that the best teacher of all is nature. Observe nature. Watch how nature flows and try to be in harmony with life and with energy. Like David said, as much as you can. Try to be in harmony with the energy flow of the universe. And Taoism also teaches that your action should not be forced or preconceived or determined. It should just behave in a natural, spontaneous, unforced way. Like you said, go with the flow. Well, what's the right thing to do? And it comes more from intuition. It's not so much an intellectual thing as it is intuitive. And Taoism, Chinese philosophy, in some ways is the opposite of the Buddha's teaching, because the Buddha's teaching is very, very logical, right? Dukkha, step 1. Cause of dukkha, step 2. Step 3, solution to dukkha. Step 4, eightfold path. 1, 2, 3, right? And Taoism is the opposite. It's just the opposite of logical. And so you have that combined with Buddhism, and that's where you get things like the Zen koans. Who were you before you were born? Who were you before your parents were born? Can you answer that logically? If you're at the top of a 100-meter pole, how do you keep going? How do you answer that? Does that make any sense? But think about it. Is life all logical? Is everything we do logical? Can we live our lives in a completely logical way? So part of the purpose of Zen is to try to break you out of logical thinking, break you out of the way that you normally think, try to get you to think differently, think in a new way. That kind of breaks you out of your normal patterns, not just of thought, but also of behavior. It's very, very challenging, much more difficult in a way than Theravada Buddhism. It really, sometimes you think you really have to crack your wits to try to answer one of those koan questions. But at the same time, it helps you free your mind. It helps you free yourself in some ways. You really find that you will change in different ways if you really continue to practice and follow Zen teachings. Thing about intuition, that's something, any other Americans here? Who else? Yeah, a few Americans. Anybody know about the impact of Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism on American writers of the 19th century? Anybody? Yeah, if you're familiar at all with Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, all of them were very strongly impacted by this philosophy. And in fact, there was a school called the American Transcendentalists who also said that intuition is more important than intellect or logic. And I had that experience when I was visiting a temple in Japan. I stayed there for 3 days as a visitor and did meditation and hung out with the priest and his wife. And after 3 days, as I was about to leave, he looked at me and he said, "You often imagine things that aren't really happening, don't you?" And I thought, how do you know that? And he said, "Try not to do that so much." And I'm like, wow, how can he know that after just hanging out with me and seeing me for 3 days? It's like something that has stuck with me ever since. Intuition. Another very important thing about Zen is they talk about enlightenment a lot, that the goal is enlightenment, but at the same time there's another paradox. Try to do meditation and study Zen without any goal. So you have the goal of enlightenment, but don't have a goal while you're meditating. They say when you sit, you should just sit in order to sit. When you study, just study in order to study. That's something that's old part of Chinese and Japanese philosophy. Try not to have goals for your behavior. That's very hard to understand, I think even more so for Westerners. We're always thinking, what am I going to get out of this, right? What am I going to get out of studying Buddhism? What am I going to get out of meditating, right? And so in Zen we say, meditate in order to meditate. Don't think, how do I reach enlightenment? You know, how's this? If it comes, it's going to just come. Don't try to go for it. If it's going to come, it's going to come. Just kind of like love, you know. The harder you try to find love, the less likely you're going to find it, right? And if you just let it happen, so the term that they use in Japanese, that comes from a Chinese word that I really can't pronounce, the term that they use in Japanese is satori. But satori doesn't exactly mean enlightenment. Does anybody know what it means in Japanese, satori? That's what you're trying to reach. It means awakening. We don't use the word enlightenment so much, meaning like you're reaching nibbana. We talk about waking up. What would that mean in our lives, to be awakened, to wake up? Anybody? It would mean to be fully conscious, fully alive, that you're living your life fully, seeing things clearly, because they call there's a phrase called the 3 poisons of life. Anybody familiar with that? What we call the 3 poisons? Greed, hatred or aversion, and delusion. And so the idea is, if you're really a conscious human being, you're going to see things clearly. You're not going to live in fantasies and delusion. You're seeing reality. That's a big part of Zen, seeing reality clearly. And if you do that, that will help you to get out of the cycles of anger and greed and hatred and so on. So that's a very important difference. Yeah.
Is kensho the same thing? Kensho is a word.
Yeah.
Is kensho the same thing?
Kensho is like a milder form of realization. Satori would be like when somebody is really completely conscious, completely awakened. Kensho, some of you have probably had that experience where you just have like a realization. You see something clearly, or you understand something really clearly, more clearly than you have before. I think everyone has that experience, right? And satori is when you've reached that level where, you know, you're just seeing everything more clearly. And that's something they talk about in other philosophies too, like, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the Sufis, Sufism, you know, the poets Rumi, Hafez. They also talk about, are you really fully alive, or do you feel like you're sleepwalking in your life? Now, there's a phrase some people have that most of us think we're awake, you know, we're making breakfast, brushing our teeth, you know, going to work. But it's almost like we're sleepwalking through our lives. Anyone ever feel like that? And you wake up the next morning, what did I do yesterday? Right? It still happens to me. And so the idea is to wake up. You know, there's even a great Spanish poet, Antonio Machado, who said that that was the real teaching of Jesus. Wake up. To live life fully consciously and really live fully. So, they don't use the term nirvana so much in Zen, but one thing that I've learned, and it took me many, many years to learn this, that some people think nibbana is some sort of ecstatic state where you reach nibbana and you're ecstatically happy for the rest of your life. Is that right? Sounds pretty good, right? I'd like that. Yeah. But anybody know, I've learned this actually from people who study Tibetan Buddhism. Anybody know what's thought of as reaching Nibbana? Same thing in Theravada. It's not you never have any suffering anymore, but it's that you've reached that stage that the Buddha talked about in the Four Noble Truths. You've reached that stage where you're no longer suffering because of attachments and clinging and grasping, where, like, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, it's where you've accepted life as it is. You're content with your life. You're content with this is reality. Life is never going to be perfectly blissful. But you've accepted life as it is. And there's going to be pain. There's going to be illness. People around you are going to die. Someday you're going to die. But you're no longer in anguish about these things. Yeah, I'm going to die someday. Okay. And what will I do with my life until then? That's the idea. How can I live the best possible life? And Zen is also part of what we call Mahayana Buddhism. Anybody know what that means, Mahayana? Yeah, the greater vehicle, yeah. Because in Mahayana Buddhism, which is more like in North Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and spread, they felt that in Theravada Buddhism, people were mostly just concerned with their own spiritual development, their own enlightenment. That monks were thinking, how do I reach enlightenment? How do I reach Nibbana? And what we should be thinking of in Buddhism is not just myself, but how do I help everybody else? And so that's why they call it the greater vehicle. I'm not just thinking of myself, I'm including everyone around me. And, sorry? Wait, use the microphone.
I think I just wanted to add a word for everybody, is that in Theravada is the arahantship. You become an arahant or arhat. In Mahayana, the emphasis is on becoming bodhisattva. You become bodhisattva for the benefit of everybody else. I'm just repeating what you said. I just wanted to add that word bodhisattva. And that's what we have these, so many bodhisattvas, Avalokitesvara and all
Yep, he's right. Yeah, and it's actually an insult to use the term Hinayana, which means the smaller vehicle. That's like a real pejorative term that Mahayanists use for Theravada. Theravada is the proper term to use for the kind of Buddhism that's practiced mostly in Southeast Asia. And it means, I think it means something like the old teachings or the teachings of
The teaching of the elders.
the teaching of the elders, right? Yeah. So that's how Buddhism started, and it's focused on the suttas that the Buddha taught. And in Zen Buddhism and in Tibetan Buddhism, they kept developing their own philosophies. But one thing I also think is important, and this is something that I argued with about other Zen teachers and Zen practitioners, is what is the purpose of Zen? What is the purpose of Buddhism? Because that's something that's often brought up as a question. Is Buddhism a philosophy, or is it a religion, or is it a way of life? Anybody want to speak to that? Yeah? Eli?
Yeah, I actually have a question about this because I was looking at some statistics not too long ago, and Buddhism essentially is a dying religion in the world, and that, in the next 50 years or something like that, its overall proportion of the population will be much lower than it is right now, and probably due a lot to, population growth, but one of the factors is the proselytizing. The Buddhists don't have, from my understanding, a tradition of proselytizing. However, this is to that question, it seems that Buddhist practices, especially things like mindfulness meditation, have spread all over the world. Everyone, from Google and Microsoft, the Silicon Valley teaches it to schools across Africa, kind of thing. So that's that kind of question of what is Buddhism? Is it its practices, or is it its rituals, or is it its, patriarchal, hierarchical systems of control, or what is it?
All right, David has his hand up.
It's interesting you brought that up because I think Buddhism is so practical. I believe it is more of a philosophy and easier to use in your daily life than the other world's religions. So you can strip out the religious part of it. And so, like you said, I'm from Silicon Valley as well. A lot of people take the meditation, the stress reduction out of it. And you're probably right because Buddhism doesn't proselytize like some of the other religions like Christian
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, the Buddha had no idea that his teachings were going to turn into a religion. And it's possible that Jesus didn't either. Jesus wasn't a Christian. The Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. They were giving instructions and advice for how to live a good life. And you have that in all religions. But Buddhism has been turned into a religion for most people. It has the trappings of religion, temples, priests and nuns and monks and monasteries and rituals and ceremonies and prayers. But the essence of Buddhism is as a philosophy. I've always thought of Buddhism as a philosophy, not my religion. And it's how to live your life is the way that I see it. That's something that I had an argument with some of you were here a couple of weeks ago when Reggie was speaking, because his teachers in Japan would say, meditation, that's what Zen is, meditation. Everything else is extraneous, everything else is extra. Zen means meditating, it means sitting. That's what Zen is. And I'm like, well, yeah, but what are you sitting for? What do you do when you get up off the cushion? What do you do when you leave the monastery? Or what do you do when you leave the temple? How do you live your life? And that's a lot of what the Buddha taught. Anybody else on that?
To answer that question, what is Buddhism, is impossible. There are thousands of answers to it. It's an idea, it is a teaching that started 2,500 years ago, went to all kinds of different cultures, was picked up by people with all kinds of different backgrounds, who added on all their own ideas. Then there were all kinds of philosophical schools that developed them in different directions. So what is Buddhism? Well, if you ask the Tibetan, the Japanese, the person in Sri Lanka, you all get different answers. And whether it's a religion or not, that depends on your definition of religion, whether it's a philosophy, how do you see philosophy, and what's the role of philosophy. I like to compare it to a toolkit, and I like the comparison of Buddha with a doctor. He's a doctor and he noticed that you have a certain illness. That is that part of your life where you feel not really satisfied, the world is not as it is, things are changing, and then he diagnoses it, and that's the reason why you have this illness, and that is how you can cure the illness. And then he gives you a big toolkit of all kinds of things that you can do and not do to get over that initial problem. That's just my interpretation, and you may have your own.
Thank you. This is a very difficult question, as you all know. And one of the chain of discussions, at least around some people I know, was that everybody, all the great people wanted to answer, who am I, what am I, where did I come from? And since they didn't have any proof whatsoever, they came up with lots of theories, which we call philosophies. And the story that goes in teaching of science is, a theory will succeed and will be adopted for a long time until such time a better theory comes along. So a better theory will come along, the Big Bang, which is not fully adopted either. And I think there is a lot more followers now who actually write, at least in the US surveys, as I'm talking about, who say that we don't believe in any religion. That is the fastest growing religion there is, because that's the theory we have. So that's my just an observation more than saying I know what will happen tomorrow.
I like the idea of it being like a method or a mode of inquiry, where you not just to blindly follow what people are saying, but to use the tools to kind of experience and see for yourself.
One thing Ren said is that, you can think of it as if the Buddha was a doctor and he's giving us the medicine to cure our illness. And actually, this is something I heard Ajahn Pasano talk about. He was one of Ajahn Chah's followers and is in charge of one of the monasteries in California. This is something I'd never heard otherwise, that the Eightfold Path was spoken in the language of medicine. And some of you have probably seen that pictures or statues of the medicine Buddha. That's very popular in Tibet and Nepal. The medicine Buddha, the Buddha holding a bowl of medicine. It's that the Buddha was trying to cure our illness, our emotional, mental illness. But, we're still going to have physical pain and physical illness, but for most people now, the biggest problems are our psychological and emotional problems, and that's what he was trying to address. A couple of other things, important things to point out. A big part of Mahayana philosophy is the belief that everyone has Buddha nature. You've probably heard some monks or priests or ajahns say, you are already enlightened, you just don't know it. And we wouldn't really say it exactly like that. It's not you're enlightened and you don't know it. So some people say we're already enlightened, but I would say it's more like we all have the nature to become enlightened. We all have Buddha nature. That's a very important part of Zen and Mahayana philosophy. Everyone has the Buddha inside them. That's a very, very old Zen saying, look inside, there is the Buddha. And what we are trying to do is realize that in our lives. The Buddha even said, I didn't achieve anything unique. Everyone can become what I have become. Everyone can reach the same level of wisdom or enlightenment that I have if you try hard enough. And you might be thinking, oh, I'm not smart enough to do that, or I'm not strong enough to do that. And again, part of the roots of Zen go back to China. Anybody here familiar with the 8 immortals of Taoism? Sometimes you'll see a picture of 8 figures in a Chinese temple or even in a Chinese restaurant. Anyone familiar with the 8 immortals? That's something that comes from Taoism. They're immortals, not that they physically live forever, but that they have transcended space and time. They're no longer bound by the ideas of space and time. So metaphorically, they live forever, and they go all around the world trying to help other people. And one of them is deformed and disabled. And that's to show it doesn't matter how strong you are. And another one is what we used to call dim-witted or half-witted, not very bright. And it shows it doesn't matter how intelligent you are. Another one is a woman to show it doesn't matter if you're male or female, you can reach the same level of enlightenment. Doesn't matter how strong you are, how smart you are. One of them is an actor. Another one is a barber. You don't have to be, some, great, person. That everyone can reach Nibbana. Everyone has the Buddha inside. And what we're trying to do is realize that in our own lives. And the last very important thing I should probably say about Zen is a lot of it depends on your own experiences. And the Buddha said that also. He said, don't believe anything I say just because I say it. Test it out and see if it matches your own experience. And if it doesn't, then you should believe your own experience. And one last thing I should say that's important in Zen is there's a lot of humor in Zen, which I'll talk about for a few minutes. One thing that I really recommend is there's a new group on Facebook called Buddhist Humor. If you plug in Buddhist Humor on Facebook, every day you'll get a few great cartoons, jokes, photos, things like that, and it's really, really, really a lot of fun to see that on your Facebook page every day. Like for example, there'll be a cartoon of a man climbing up a mountain to find the great guru, and the guru says, "Wrong mountain. You want the mountain and the guru over there." And some of you know, sometimes it'll be a video. Some of you have probably heard the joke about the Dalai Lama ordering pizza, and the Dalai Lama says, "Make me one with everything." Yeah. And so there's a video of the Dalai Lama was being interviewed on Australian TV, and the interviewer said, "What do you think about the joke about you ordering a pizza?" And the Dalai Lama says, "What joke?" and the interviewer says, "I know another one. You go to the pizzeria and you say, 'Make me one with everything.'" And the Dalai Lama says, "I don't understand. Why is that funny?" There's a lot of humor in Tibetan Buddhism also. If you've ever seen the Dalai Lama, you see him laughing a lot. I've seen him in California a few times. At the end of his talks, he would usually say, "I hope you feel like you got something of value out of my talk today. And if not, just forget the whole thing." So I should probably say that at the end also. One thing also about Zen is that we use not just humor, we also use poetry, stories, art, theater, lots of different ways to get across Zen ideas. And some of you might know some of the famous Japanese poets of the past, like Basho and Issa, haiku poets. Ryokan wrote longer poems. So, and anybody here familiar with Ikkyu? Some people are familiar with Ikkyu just from the cartoons that are on YouTube that show Ikkyu as a clever little boy, but as a grown-up, he was a great Zen priest and wrote all this really great poetry. And so that's another way in which Zen has been transmitted over the years. I had this handout for you, which I'm not going to go through everything today. There's not enough time. But I think the most important things are that in Zen, where you see merit, in Zen we don't talk about doing things in order to make merit. I know many of you are familiar with the idea of making merit. We talk about that a lot in Theravada. Here in Thailand, people talk about going to the temple to make tambun. And in Zen, we don't think that you're doing something in order to gain merit or in order to have a better karma. You do it because you think it's a good thing to do. And engaged Buddhism has come out of that. The idea, Thich Nhat Hanh, many of you have heard of Thich Nhat Hanh, the idea of going out of the temple, going out of the monastery, and helping poor people, helping sick people, and you can see that growing all around the world. Another important difference between Zen and most other Buddhist sects is in Zen we don't teach reincarnation, because if you think about it, if everything is impermanent and you don't have a permanent self, no soul, what is there to reincarnate? And this is something Ajahn Pandit gave a talk about years ago, that in the Buddha's teachings, he taught something called rebirth, not reincarnation. Does anybody? It's very hard to explain rebirth. Usually it's taught through metaphors, like Ajahn Pandit would say, well, it's kind of like when your candle's about to go out, you light the next candle. Things like that. But it's not reincarnation. That's the Hindu idea. But most people and most Buddhists believe in the Hindu version of reincarnation, that after you die, you're going to come back in a new body. But that's not what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that in some way your energy continues. That's true in physics, right? Energy is never destroyed completely. Your energy will continue in some way. If you have children, you're going to be present in some way in your children. Even if you don't have children, you'll be present in some way in your friends, the relatives, the people that you touch. If you write a book, people might still read your book. If you are on YouTube, maybe people will still see you on YouTube. You get the idea that in some way your energy continues after you die. But from what I understand, the Buddha thought, oh, everybody here is a Hindu. If I say there's no reincarnation, we're going to lose a lot of people. And so I asked one Zen priest about it, and he said, well, they decided, well, is there really any harm in people believing in reincarnation? Maybe it's even a good thing if people think that if they do something terrible in this lifetime, they're going to pay for it in the next lifetime, or they'll come back as a dog or an insect. All right, let people believe in reincarnation. We won't say it doesn't exist. We'll just let people believe what they want. Who knows what happens after we die? And that's how reincarnation, is still present in Buddhism. But Zen is one of the few Buddhist sects that doesn't teach reincarnation, because if there's no permanent Joe, how can Joe come back in another body? And I think the only other major branch of Buddhism that doesn't teach reincarnation is Pure Land Buddhism. They teach that there's like a kind of Buddhist heaven that you go to if you live a good life and pray a lot. That's pretty strong in China and Japan. So those are points that I wanted to make. Any questions? Yeah?
You had it on your list, dualism.
Sorry?
You had it on your list, the notion of dualism and non-dualism. Is this something that is specific to Zen, or is non-dualism and the belief of non-dualism something that's generally Buddhist?
Oh, gee, I'm afraid I can't really give an adequate answer to that in 30 seconds. What you say by the bell. What we used to say when I was a teacher is, okay, I want you to look that up for Tuesday. Okay, I think we're out of time.
We are done, more or less.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Okay, well, I think the applause says a lot. Thank you very much, Joe, for having a very nice evening, complete with a bundle of jokes. You forgot to tell the follow-up joke about the pizza, because then the Dalai Lama wants to pay, and he gives a $20 bill to the pizza guy, while the pizza is only $15. And the pizza guy doesn't give any money back to the Dalai Lama. So he said, well, no, I want some change. And then the pizza guy said, well, for all people, you should know that change should come from within. Okay, next week we have something completely different. We'll have the Dhamma circle again. So then we go to hardcore Theravada, go back to the suttas, and look into the text of a quite famous book written by a monk from Sri Lanka. That will be next week, and then after that one, we'll probably have a pandit. And after that, we'll see what will be next. That, of course,
Yeah. And some of us will go to a nearby restaurant or cafe to continue the conversation, and everyone is welcome to join us. Is this your first time here? Have we met before?
Yeah, we've been before. I've been coming for a few weeks, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm Lexi. Lexi.
Lexi, I'm Joe.
Yeah, thanks for the talk.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Of course.
Joe, so much.
Thanks for coming.
Welcome. You want the copies?
Yeah.
The copies.
Oh, these are extras? Oh, just a couple of them.
Thank you.
The question about dualism, boy, that's a difficult one to answer. I mean, even for me, it's hard to understand. You gonna stay around?
I'm meeting here tomorrow, as you know, so I came just for your talk. I'll see you.
I'm going to take off because I've got an early meeting.
Oh, okay. Thanks for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Good. Yeah, we'll be in touch.
Yeah. So we need to decide with Nick. I sent a message about
The question was more, I mean, we don't have to go too deeply into non-dualism, but is it a concept that is